So let me explain to you why we do not give IV fluids to dying patients on hospice. This is always my number one question families ask me, and it's the hardest one for families to grasp. And I get it, it sounds counterintuitive. When someone's truly in the actively dying phase, which is usually a few days to a few hours before death, their body will go fully unconscious and will not be eating and drinking. This allows the body to start taking over its natural death and dying processes that are built in to help us die peacefully. Starting IV hydration at that time will actually hurt, not help that patient, because the body will not do what it's supposed to do with that hydration. That fluid that we're giving intravascularly will start third spacing. It'll seep out of the vascular system and start third spacing and cause edema in the legs, and then eventually back up in the heart and into the lungs, causing respiratory distress. Fluid will not prolong the life, it'll only make the death less peaceful.
Amy lost her dad a few years ago, brain tumour, and they asked for him to be dehydrated. Amy's trying to save his life and wants him to live, and that's why he had the extra operation and etc, but they were talking about dehydration, and obviously this video we've just watched is the same thing. But it says towards the end of someone's life, this is what's supposed to happen really. Let's look down here at this. So there's a bit there, but I don't know, I think it sounds horrible to me. So it says you can live a long time without eating, but dehydration, lack of fluid, speeds up the dying process. Dying from dehydration is generally not uncomfortable once the initial feeling of thirst subsides. So I thought the lady said that this was all a process of the body shutting down and going into death. So why would they feel uncomfortable if they're dying and their body's going through all this? Then they wouldn't mind the dehydration. But here it says, once the uncomfortable initial feelings of thirst subside. So it sounds like you're killing them. I don't know, I don't sit very comfortably with this. I know that it may be the correct protocol nowadays, but I don't like it. I don't think it sounds very good. What is dehydrating to death called? Terminal dehydration is to the point of death. Some scholars made a distinction between terminal dehydration and termination by dehydration. I think it's termination by dehydration, not terminal dehydration. Yes, that's a very good point. How should the dying patient be treated? After small, frequent sips of liquid, ice chips or popsicles, choice of fluids. How should the dying choice of fluids should be patient given, and he or she should be given several options. Do not offer fluids if patient is unable to swallow. Risk of aspiration. Alright, okay. When death isn't very far away, the skin of the heels, feet and hands may become puffish, grey, blotchy or mottled. How many signs? Anyway. Yes. I'm not very happy about that. I don't think there's any way that you can prove that someone's ready to be dehydrated for death. I don't know. What's your thoughts on that? Well, I do happen to have the lovely Amy with me right now. Amy, you watched the video. Do you believe in what she says? Like, she's saying if you give a dying patient fluids, you're not helping the process of death. But it sounds to me like they must be quite weak. And then dehydration, they're saying speeds it along. But it sounds horrible, Amy. Like, suddenly if you were told no fluids for that person, then they're not allowed to have any fluids anymore, you're going to think, what, are they dehydrating me for death? I don't know. It's horrible. And they did it to your dad. They did this to Amy's dad, didn't they, Amy?
Yes, they did. He was having trouble anyway, but then the nurses told us to call the hospital and take him to the hospital to get the IV fluids. That's what the nurses said to do. So we did that. Then when they got there, they didn't even want to give him the fluids. But I just told them, if you don't give him fluids, I'm going to just take my father home. And they wanted to put him on a ventilator. And they said that he could be dead in a couple of hours, which I was horrified. But they got him stabilized at the hospital. Then he came home, and then he was having trouble with breathing, so they took him into the inpatient hospice, and that's where they stopped giving him any fluids of any kind. And they tried to explain it kind of like that lady did, but it kind of sounded like rubbish to me. And he really needed, I think he would have been in a better way if they would have been giving him fluids in the first place. But they just refused to give you fluids.
Because they did this to Monique's dad as well.
Yes, that's right. That was terrible. But they did, I didn't know when you put them in the hospice that they aren't going to give you any fluids. I didn't realize that till after we signed up, and it just sounded so inhumane or something.
Because it's a bit confusing, really, because what it says is if someone's dying and you are trying to sort of starve with the dehydration, give them ice pops and ice popsicles and things like that, and you're like, well, she said give nothing. She's saying if the body is shutting down, then the body goes into this process, and if you add lots of fluid and food, it just makes everything worse for the dying body.
Yes. Yeah, that's kind of what they explained to us after he got into the hospice, and I was so upset that they were doing that.
I don't think it sounds very humane at all, because about 20 years ago it was like, what, they're having lots of morphine, then you knew what that meant then, didn't you? You knew that they were killing them off with morphine. Now they do it with dehydration.
Yes.
I suppose it's cheaper, isn't it, Amy?
I bet. And then they do still give them some morphine to speed it along, I guess. But yeah, it probably is cheaper to just do it that way.
But just one more bit that I find the most saddest is that it was a bit like, it probably caught you a bit by unawares, but what did that nurse tell you that you had to do, or what was best for your dad?
Oh, they tell him to just let go and just die. They right in front of him, and that was when he was supposed to be trying to get a little better, and she just made a speech that we had to let go.
Because I think that's so cruel for your dad, because your dad couldn't speak or do anything, and he was hearing all this. Imagine that, you go to the hospital, you're not feeling very good, and you can hear the nurse saying, just tell him to let go. Imagine what he must have been feeling, really, even if he didn't say anything.
Exactly.
That's what I mean, like, let's make it all sound like it's all humane and everything, when actually, experience you had with your dad, it was very inhumane, and the whole thing.
Yes, it was, and they try to tell you that it is humane, but it didn't seem that way to me. But when he finally passed, he was unconscious and everything. He never woke up or anything, and he was unconscious, so he didn't look like he was like really suffering or anything, thank God. But I just had never realized they didn't do that to my grandfather, which he died in 2001. And they didn't do it. They just
he's probably morphine, wasn't he? Because it used to be once they start upping the morphine.
Yeah, they put a drip in him, but the nurse did say they're not allowed to do that anymore. So they dehydrate you, and then every few hours they give you a little bit of morphine. So they do it a little bit different with my grandfather. It just sounds horrible.
Yeah, anyway, we're going to finish this letter because I just wanted to bring you in because it was just quite ironic that I was doing this video, and I thought, I'll be speaking to Amy in a minute and hear what Amy has to say. Sorry, Amy, because you wouldn't agree with this nurse. I mean, you'd have to be totally unconscious, all your vital signs were going down. Then I could understand if you're totally unconscious, you've been unconscious for a few days and it looks like you're dying, then maybe they will do this. But most patients are awake.
Oh, I know.
You know, lucky for those that go into some kind of coma and go off, I suppose. But a lot of people are awake going through this. The lady, I remember I went to a funeral, I worked for someone, I told you this, and they didn't move her in the bed, and I could just tell because all her hair was flat. she'd been in there about 4 or 5 weeks, I suppose. And when she moved her head, like no one had touched her for weeks because her hair wasn't brushed. It was just a flat mess at the back of her head. I was like, wow, no one's looking after her. And she kept saying, and they probably did make her the same, because she was going, I can't swallow. When I swallow, there's something wrong. And she was telling me that before she went into hospital. And while she's in hospital, she's still telling me that. But then she looked awful one day when I went in. I mean, I didn't realise it was the last day. She said, please, I want you to go. I don't feel very good at all. And she died a few hours later.
Oh, that's so sad.
But they obviously did the same to her because she couldn't swallow, so she'd have had Nil By Mouth on her.
Right.
Do you think that's how they get rid of patients? Well, they won't really notice. They start going down a hip, they go into a bit of a coma. Lots of people might come through. Oh, we'll just give them a bit of morphine and take their fluids away. They'll be dead in a day. Because it says that dehydration helps death along. You think, wow.
Oh, I know. It
just sounds horrible, doesn't it? It just doesn't sound... I don't know what is humane. We don't even talk about death enough anyway. I don't mean to sound morbid or anything, but that just doesn't sound very nice.
No, it really doesn't. It sounds just horrible.
And then most people believe the doctors, don't they? And will go along with it, even if they could have saved them or things are really different. I just don't know. I don't know. I just don't trust these people anymore. But yeah.
Yeah, it's very tragic.
Anything else to say, Amy? Because we're going to finish in a second. But any more to say?
It's just terrible. I just hope rest in peace, all these poor people that have had to go through this, like my dad and Monique's dad and your friend and all of the people. May they just rest in peace now.
Thank you, Amy.
You're welcome, Karen.